L&D has to shift its view of what it does from being a producer of courses to being a sharer and spreader of important information in the business.
Welcome back to Stay Hungry, the podcast that explores the power of knowledge sharing to drive change in the workplace. I'm your host, Marcus Almén, and in this podcast, we're diving into the L&D Global Sentiment Survey, the annual report that reveals the biggest trends shaping the workplace learning. This year, AI has retaken center stage, but what's equally fascinating is the return of value-driven L&D, consulting with the business, proving impact, and supporting performance. What's behind this shift, and what does it mean for the future of knowledge sharing? To help us unpack these insights, Donald H. Taylor, a recognized expert in workplace learning and technology, joins me here today. He has chaired the Learning Technologies Conference in London and remains one of the most respected voices out there in the L&D community. Donald, welcome to Stay Hungry.
Great to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
It's a pleasure having you here. But before we dive into the results of the survey, for those who might not be familiar, can you give us a quick overview of what the L&D Global Sentiment Survey is and why it matters if you're a business leader?
I can explain what it is, but I guess it's really up to people themselves to decide why it matters. But let's see if I can help. So it's a survey that's been running for the past 12 years, and in the past we asked one question that's now expanded to 5 questions, but of those only 2 are important, and there's only one obligatory question. That is, what will be hot next year in workplace learning and development? And the other question is, what are your challenges in the year ahead? So these questions we've run consistently for the past 4 years, and the what's hot question for the past 12 years. People get a chance to answer they pick 1, 2, or 3 things for the hot question from a list of 16 options. And actually, most people choose 3 things. And for the what's your challenge for the year ahead, that's a free text answer. People can write in anything they want. So we analyze those 2 to try to understand where the trends are year on year and country by country, according to what people think is important, and also what the challenges are. Interestingly, the challenges don't vary as much as what people think is hot, but there's certainly variations. So that's the Global Sentiment Survey.
Interesting. And I know for a fact that this year, approximately 3,300 people took part of the survey, right? Ranging from roughly 93 countries. And that's a massive sampling size, yeah? And I know for a fact that once again, AI is topping the lists.
Yeah.
And last year you predicted its peak and that it was perhaps a one-off. But here we are with even more votes for AI than before. What do you think is driving this sustained interest in AI right now?
Consistently, we've seen that what drives interest in anything on the survey is the fact that it's being talked about. It sounds obvious, but it's just the truth. There's what I call the wordscape, the words that surround us, like a landscape, but made up of words rather than trees and landscape and what have you. So the wordscape is made up of the words we hear daily, and we may take them on board consciously. Very often we take them on board unconsciously, and that drives people's interest in certain things or people's reaction to certain things. So the question is, what will be hot this year? The reaction to that is that people look at it and they very quickly make an answer. They choose 3 things off the list and move on. We have typically 60% of people answer the question, the whole questionnaire, in 2 minutes or less. So it's designed to get a very quick pulse check of the world. That instinctive reaction means people are going straight away for the thing that they just have probably heard about most in the months or even weeks running up to the survey. AI has dominated what people have been hearing about on social media and in the regular media. So it's not a surprise, perhaps, that it came in as number 1 on the survey with a greater vote this year than last year. I had predicted, you're right, I had predicted that we'd have a smaller vote for AI this year, but that was looking back at previous voting patterns where things go up and they come down again. The vote for AI has been so strong and everything has been so unusual that right now the past is not a good guide for the future. So I should have just accepted that things were going to be different this year, and they are. AI is massively out in front at the top of the results table.
And despite its dominance, many L&D professionals still feel a bit overwhelmed by AI, right? And they are obviously unsure of how to implement it efficiently. What do you think is causing this hesitation out there?
It's always the problem when you've got something which there's been an incredibly large amount of noise about since November 2022, when ChatGPT was launched, for certainly 2 years and probably a bit more than that, up to the end of last year, 2024, there was a lot of noise about AI. It has slowed down a bit now. We're doing this recording in February 2025, but there's been so much noise that you can't avoid it. And people then ask themselves, well, am I being left behind? And that induces a sort of fear in people that they're not keeping up. That's one thing that actually stops people implementing something, because they hear all these things, they don't know where to start. The other thing is that people aren't quite sure what they should be doing with AI. And there are lots of things you can do with it. But again, when there's so much choice, people get a bit confused. Now, the research that Egla Vinauskaite and I have done over the past year, we did 3 reports in the course of 12 months from November 2023 to October 2024, looking at how AI was being used in L&D. Those 3 reports have really brought out the reality of implementation. Some people are doing a great job. Other people are doing nothing, and there are lots of people in the middle doing some things. The conditions for a successful implementation of AI is readiness on 3 levels. You have to have the basic skills and understanding of AI in your L&D department. Your business has to be ready, or a part of your business has to be ready to work with L&D with an AI solution. And your L&D department itself has to be ready. That's different from having the skills and the understanding. You can have that, but you also have the mindset and the connections, the relationships to make it possible for the L&D department to put AI to use. Those 3 things, being technically ready, being ready as a department, and the organization being ready, is what makes it possible for L&D to implement AI. A lot of organizations don't have the organization or the L&D readiness in that piece.
So many organizations don't have the maturity to actually approach AI, even though they have the willingness to test the waters.
The good news is Egla and I have done some case studies in those reports, and it's worth going and having a look at those and understanding how people have actually done it. For the next report, which we'll have coming out in probably September of this year, 2025, we'll have another look exactly at how do you start. That's our main mission now, to try to help people over that barrier of getting started.
So I'm a little bit curious about that, because AI can obviously be implemented everywhere in the organization, on a strategic level, on a process level, but also very hands-on. Yeah. What are knowledge orchestrators or leaders and L&D teams applying AI? Do you know?
I think about it this way around. If people are doing it successfully, if people are using AI successfully, what they're doing is they're drawing on a valuable business database. So if you look at implementations that have made a successful difference to the business, it's something that's drawn on an existing body of data in the business. And a great example of that is HSBC using AI to train its customer call center people to do a better job. And it's not just a random better job that people feel it is. That's something that's been well documented by industry standard measures around customer satisfaction. And the improvement is about 10 points of customer satisfaction from 75 to 85 or 85 to 95. So that sort of big jump. And it happens whether the customer service center is based in the UK or abroad. And what they've done is their data set is tens of thousands of hours of conversations that people have had with customers, and they've used AI to go through those, working with a partner to discover what are the best ways to have conversations with your customers that achieve the outcomes that everybody wants, what makes a good one, what makes a bad one, and they are coaching people when they join the business, coaching people when they want to learn something new on the business, coaching people if they're having difficulty with one particular area of what they do when they're well established in the business. And they're doing that in a way that enables people to feel that they are going through something like a flight simulator before flying. So they can simulate a conversation. The difference is that this flight simulator can also be involved while you're having a conversation with a real customer. And so it can give you a hint and suggest you say this and don't say that while you're talking to somebody. All of that is based on, as I say, a data set. So the question is, who's doing a good job with this? Well, it's people who've got a good, clean, valuable data set to work with. And it's a place where the learning and development department has a relationship with the business where both sides are willing and ready to use AI to deal with things in a different way than's ever been done before.
Yeah, very interesting. And one thing that stood out is also AI's role in coaching and mentoring. And that is possibly being overlooked, right? Why do you think L&D professionals aren't seeing its potential here?
Well, I think some are seeing it, and I think one problem with the way I put the research together is I introduced the term AI in 2017, when it was possible to talk about AI as a general thing you had in the background doing stuff with data. Then 22 happened, and Gen AI tools like ChatGPT exploded, and people have a really sort of a very specific idea of what you can do with AI, which tends to be, well, you can make a chatbot with it, when of course you can do a lot more than just that with it. And strangely, even though that's their view of what you can do with AI, they're not transferring that onto the idea of coaching. There is absolutely no idea in my mind that coaching is going to be one of the areas where AI is going to make a huge difference to how we work in the future. We've seen it, as I say, with that example from HSBC. There are lots of other examples where I see coaching and mentoring being done, more coaching being done very well by machines, let's put it that way. So a combination of algorithms and hardware in conjunction with a real person, and very occasionally just the machinery itself. That depends on how high risk the coaching is. If it's a very high risk one with high risk of consequences, then you have to have a human involved. But for something like dealing with customer complaints, that's a perfect example of where you can use AI to make sure that everybody in the organization has access to the sort of coaching which might have previously been available to only a few people. But what's strange is that coaching is something where I thought that would be something that would be obviously a place where AI would be used, and yet votes for coaching and mentoring are down this year. I think people are so focused still on the idea of AI that they're less looking at how it can be implemented across different things that happen in L&D and in the business. So people are still fixated on the mechanism rather than the outcome.
One of the biggest surprises in this year's report was the return of value-focused L&D, right?
Yeah.
Specifically, the rise of 3 key themes. Can you tell us about these themes, please?
Sure. There are 3 options which behave differently to everything else on the table. Everything else on the table starts high and goes down over time. And this is quite natural because things start with people being excited about them, like mobile delivery, which was the top of the table back in 2014. And then it declines over time as it moves from being either super exciting and new to being business as usual, like mobile delivery, or from being super exciting and new to being, well, just something which turned out to be more difficult than we thought. So generally, that's what happens. But it doesn't happen to 3 particular options on the table, which are consulting more deeply with the business, showing value, and performance support. And I guess the idea is that you consult with the business to find out what the problem is. You do something that enables support for performance, and then you show that you've delivered value at the end of it. So these 3 things have been notably different, notably, clearly, predictably different for the 5 years up to last year's report. And then last year, they all took a very severe knock. All the votes went to AI, and almost everything else on the table dropped down. But these three dropped down quite spectacularly. This year, again, AI's vote has gone up. Almost everything else on the table dropped down, except for those three options. AI went up, personalization went up a small amount, but these three options all went up by at least 1%, which is a big jump. They almost got back to where they were back in 2023. Now, the question is, why are people so focused on the idea of value in L&D in a way that last year didn't seem to be important, in contrast to the previous 5 years? What's going on in people's minds? One of two things, I think. Either people are worried about their jobs because they recognize that AI challenges people's employment in anything involving content production. That includes L&D. Also, there are, not everywhere in the world, but there are in certain places, tight economic circumstances that mean that people cannot make as much money as they did, and L&D jobs are being cut. That's certainly true in the UK. Those two things together would appear to drive up those three options. On the other hand, it could be more positively that people look at the value of AI and say, well, we have these great tools now. That means that we're in a better place to show the value of learning. I think that more positive interpretation is unlikely, not least because one particular number came down this year, which was learning analytics, which came down by almost 1%. Now, learning analytics, the ability to actually interrogate data and find out what you've been doing, is pretty important. So if that's scoring less, that suggests to me people are more concerned on the outcome than how they get there. They're more concerned with being able to show the value of L&D. And that means, for me, probably people are concerned about their jobs.
That's really interesting take. So what do you see is happening out there in the L&D teams? How are they actually approaching this? How are they actually proving their value to the organization? Do you see any upcoming trend that's there? It's obviously not part of the report, but it's something that is really closely related to this topic, I think.
Organizations or L&D departments where people are struggling to try to figure out how they can show value now are in trouble, because it's not, unless it's on a very transactional basis, it's not something you can do suddenly. Showing your value is a combination of hard data and soft interpretation, perception. The hard data bit is really understanding how the business measures success, going after that, and doing it in conjunction with local managers, business leaders, so that you're solving the problems that people really have. It could be the turnover rate, it could be the number of help desk instances being raised, it could be sales. There are numbers there which are being measured and which you can go and affect. There's also the more anecdotal, perceptive view of the value of learning, and that's something that doesn't get talked about so much, but actually in organizations, to ensure the survival of the L&D department, it's pretty important. You want your managers to be able to say, well, I can't exactly put a number on it, but I know that since my team, for example, went through this social learning experience and we now share information with each other much more widely, I know that things are happening faster and there are fewer problems, and we seem to be making more creative deals than we've done before. Now, there are real instances where organizations can say that. They can't put a number on it, but they can point to it. And the managers and the departmental heads will absolutely say, we have to keep working with L&D because they're making this happen. So in both those instances, where you've got a hard number, or you've got somebody a manager in particular, who's got a strong feeling that L&D is delivering value, in both those cases, that's based on a relationship typically between an entrepreneurial, go-getting head of L&D and a manager in an area that has a problem and is looking out for a solution. The two come together, and the L&D person and the manager of the local department or whatever come together and they solve the problem. And whether it's proved through numbers or otherwise, the manager then goes out and sings the praises of L&D. So when it comes down to showing value, I really emphasize to people that it's important to have relationships and conversations with people as much as it is to understand the data of the business and the KPIs. I hope that answers the question as well as I can, Marcus.
Yeah, definitely. I love that. And it sounds to me that you're suggesting L&D is it could be an essential part of driving the business value, right? But also being obviously a business driver rather than a support function, to team up with the leadership team and to set the direction and sort of raise the standards within the organization, right?
Yeah, L&D can't do it by itself. It has to be in conjunction with managers who have the business problems and you're working together to solve them. But that works on the basis of relationships. And so it's building the relationships with people from which you discover those problems and work together to solve them that you get to have that value proof. It always typically starts with a cup of tea or a coffee, or I know in Sweden you're quite keen on your cake and coffee together. So maybe that, and you have a chat, and then the relationship builds, and from that, everything else comes.
Yeah. And if we move forward here a little bit, we're looking at reskilling, upskilling, and learning analytics. And you previously mentioned that moved down in the rankings.
Yep.
Why do you think these areas have lost its momentum?
Two separate reasons. So reskilling, upskilling was very hot for 3 years, and then AI knocked it off the top. And it was hot because, again, everybody was talking about it. But a bit like AI, it's a big topic that people find difficult to make happen. So it was coming down anyway. AI just pushed it down faster. So reskilling, upskilling was sort of on the way down anyway. Learning analytics is kind of the same, except it wasn't being talked about as much. So they're both fulfilling the natural fate of things on the survey, which has just become less popular over time. It's interesting that in contrast to reskilling, upskilling coming down, skills-based talent management has more or less stayed at the same level this year, which suggests to me that skills-based talent management as a phrase or as an idea is something more practical that people feel that they can understand and implement, whereas reskilling, upskilling is probably too big in general a term for people to feel that they can support as being hot. So it's almost like they're saying, yeah, I can get behind skills-based talent management because I know the organization's doing that and we have to be part of it. Whereas the reskilling, upskilling seems almost too big to support. Learning analytics, I'm surprised that's come down because all the focus on value would suggest that would be quite well supported. But again, that suggests, as I say, that people are more interested in the outcome. I want to show my value than the means of getting there, which is I need to use analytics to help me.
And of course, L&D trends don't play out the same way everywhere. What regional differences stood out to you in this year's survey?
There are 16 key countries, and AI was number one in every key country. But in each country, there is one topic, it seems, that they are particularly interested in. So in Italy, it's micro learning. Now, that may be because my partner in Italy, Mosaico Learning, they are focused on production of content. So there might be some sort of correlation there, but it might be that Italy just has a focus on that anyway. I think the next couple of years will show how much of that is just an aberration, how much it's a solid trend. The United Kingdom has always been, or pretty much always been, the country that voted the most for showing value. And this year, it produced the biggest vote for showing value across the last 12 years. And I don't know why that is. I'll come to a possible reason for that in a second. In the Netherlands, performance support is always the thing they support most. And again, this year, it was the highest vote for performance support they'd done for a good while. And it was the highest vote across the key countries. But if I just come back to that business of showing value in the UK, it is very noticeable that if you look at the votes for options by English-speaking countries and the votes for other countries that don't speak English, there is a real difference, not around the top 4 things, which are the same on each table, but around showing value and consulting more deeply with the business and performance support as well. But those two are really noticeable. And what's noticeable about them is that they're much higher on the English-speaking countryside than on the non-English speaking countries. Now, on the English speaking countryside, you've got a handful of countries that are most of the votes there. So UK, USA, Ireland, which is always a big contributor, Australia, and New Zealand and Canada, but it's really those 4 that are the big contributors there. And they've all driven up this notion of value. It's not just the UK, but they've all driven it up. On the other side, you've got something like 72 countries speaking something like 40 languages. And these are big numbers on each side. So the English-speaking side, 1,300. The non-English speaking side, almost 2,000. So I don't think it's just some statistical quirk. And by the way, it was the same last year. So it's not just this year. So what's happened here is, I think, it's not about the language. It's not that showing value is a difficult term to understand if you're not a native English speaker. There are other terms on this list that are much more difficult to understand. I think that it's much more about how people communicate and share ideas around these topics. The language of the internet, by default, is English. I'm not saying that with any particular pride, it's just a matter of fact. I think native English-speaking countries, they'll be going off and they'll be having debates amongst themselves and online, all using English, and there tends, I think, to be a large echo chamber between those English-speaking countries. With the non-English-speaking countries, people come online, they'll talk about stuff in English, and they go away and they speak in their own language, in their own country, here, whatever. So it's much more separated. And in those, I think it's possible you're getting separate ideas being amplified. So we know that in Poland, there's a very strong market for virtual reality. In Turkey, they favor learning experience platforms and so on. So there are different things which are hot in each other countries. But that means that the enthusiasm for showing value in those countries is reduced slightly because they have more enthusiasm for other things. So the non-English speaking countries has, I think, a more heterogeneous view of the world. I kind of think that the English speaking countries are closer to having one view of the world. I'm doing some more research into that at the moment because I think it's a fascinating byproduct that nobody realizes about speaking and using one language. And I think it's healthier to have lots of different viewpoints being shared than all of us agreeing on the same thing without really being aware of it. So that's quite a long answer to your question about, are there any regional differences? Yes, there are regional and there are linguistic differences as well.
Super interesting data. And I want to zoom in a little bit on Sweden because the report highlighted some interesting differences there. Unlike the global trends, Sweden has consistently supported collaborative and social learning. And why do you think this approach is still strong here while it's declining elsewhere?
Okay, so when I ask people, and it has particularly supported collaborative and social learning this year, when I ask people in Sweden about this, and one of the great things, by the way, Marcus, is that when I'm doing this, I will always do a series of webinars around the world talking to people about what's happening in their place. And I say to people, well, what is it about Sweden that means you've got this high vote for collaborative and social learning, which has been high for a while? It's not just this year. I mean, this year it was higher than last year. But over the years, it's always been high, and I think in 22 it was the number 2 choice, in 21 it was the number 1 choice, and in 20. So for a long time, collaborative and social learning has been important in Sweden. Poland, Northern Germany have this as well. So, but that's the answer I've been given for this strong and this consistent thing around collaborative and social learning. The other thing, of course, is that there are always local things that happen with particular countries where particular things happen that change the voting. So in 2021, reskilling, upskilling was very highly voted everywhere else, but not in Sweden. In Sweden, it was collaborative and social learning, as we would expect. The next year, 2022, reskilling, upskilling came down slightly in the rest of the world, but in Sweden, it absolutely went to the top. And I said to people, what's happening? Why is Sweden doing exactly the opposite of the rest of the world? And it wasn't just a small amount. It was the vote of 17% for reskilling, upskilling. And they said, well, Donald, it's very simple. Per Lager just brought out a book, and he brought this book out like in August, and the vote started in November. He just brought out this book called Reskilling and Upskilling. And obviously, when I talk about the wordscape, everybody in learning development in Sweden was talking about this book. And so naturally, that was on their minds. And it skewed the vote. And what's happened is that reskilling, upskilling has been still popular in Sweden as a result of that. And I think what's happened now is that the Swedish vote is recovering from that, pulling back some of the votes that went to reskilling, upskilling, and putting those back into collaboration. So there's a few things happening with Sweden that's making that very unusual pattern of voting take place. That's one thing that's happened in Sweden. I don't know if anything else jumped out that you spotted about how Sweden is different from the rest of the world.
What you're mentioning now is really interesting because I also believe it's a cultural thing. It's about the collective mind that everybody should chip in and give their ideas to set the direction together. That's very strong in the Nordic region,
I do believe
specifically Sweden.
It's very difficult for me to come in from the outside and say, well, you've got a particular cultural thing. You don't want an outsider coming in and saying that. But I believe from my experience of Sweden and from talking to people, that is the case, yeah.
Sounds great. And I'm just curious, zooming out here a bit, how do you see the role of L&D professionals evolving here within the next couple of years, taken from this survey? Any trends that you sort of are looking back at and saying, this is the right direction we're working in?
I'm laughing because, we could probably spend 2 hours talking about this, but I'll boil it down into this, right? I made a mistake this year. I thought, AI can't get as high a vote this year as it got last year. And I was wrong. I said that on the basis that I was looking at past data and saying, well, it looks very clear from that. You would predict that AI would come down pretty quickly. But past data is a poor indicator of future performance right now because we're living in unprecedented times. And I don't use that word lightly. We can't quite know what's going to happen next, except things are going to change probably dramatically, not in the short term, but over the longer term. And I think it's difficult to anticipate just how big that will be. But I'll say one thing. When I started as a trainer in 1987, before the World Wide Web, before email, when people still smoked in offices and it was all just a regular thing, when I started training then, it was a job that had two parts to it. You created and you distributed content. We still, in L&D, and outside L&D, we're still seen as being the people who do that. But AI makes it almost impossibly easy to create content. Certainly, we've had electronic systems capable of distributing it at scale for decades. And now we've got systems that can distribute it in a personalized fashion. In that circumstance, what's the job of L&D? It isn't to create more content by itself. And I think that's the big change L&D has to take away from this. The second big change is that there is some content which is absolutely invaluable for your organization and gives it an advantage. It's the secret sauce. It's the asymmetric information. It's the stuff that you know that nobody else knows. And that stuff is tied up in your organization, in people's heads, in systems and procedures, in documents, in corners of the organization. Understanding that, surfacing it, making it visible and learnable from for other people, that is something where L&D can make a huge difference. That's very different from doing a course on how to produce a document to company standard branding guidelines, for example, which could be done by AI, or a course on how to deal with difficult conversations, which will already exist on the internet somewhere. So L&D has to shift its view of what it does from being producer of courses to being a sharer and spreader of important information in the business. And it may be that some of the ways we do that are the same, but I think generally the way we do that will be very different, because it would involve trying to surface information and share it successfully in ways that we haven't done before. But that's where we can add probably the biggest difference to the business. Again, a kind of long answer, but I hope it makes sense.
Yes, that is food for thought, Donald. Great insights. Thank you so much. It's been a true pleasure having you here in the podcast, exploring the key takeaways from the L&D Global Sentiment Survey. And from the continued rise of AI to the renewed focus on value-driven L&D and the aligning learning with business impact. We also touched the regional differences and the skills L&D professionals should focus on to stay ahead. I'm sure our listeners are walking away with valuable insights that they can obviously apply in their own organizations. And before we round off, is there anything else you would like to add to the conversation here, Donald?
Only this, don't be afraid. If you're listening and you're in L&D, don't be afraid. It's the most exciting time to be in anything to do with sharing information, sharing knowledge, and helping people learn, because now more than ever, that's a crucial part of what organizations do. I'm in my 60s now. I wish I was in my late 20s and starting off all over again, because I would have an absolute ball taking some of this stuff and making it valuable and have a great career. That's your opportunity. Be prepared to change how you do things, but it's a great opportunity. Go out and do great work.
Thanks again, Donald, for sharing your expertise here with us today. If you like to connect with Donald, please follow him on LinkedIn and check out the full L&D Global Sentiment Survey report. Links are in the description below. And to you, our listeners, thank you for tuning in. You can catch our upcoming episodes anytime on learnstep.com or in the Spotify app. If you enjoyed this conversation, please share your feedback and let us know who you'd like to hear from next in the podcast. And that's it for this episode. Stay curious, keep learning, and as always, stay hungry for knowledge.